The ocean swallowed her name that morning, without a trace or a sound. A 23-year-old woman, statuesque and vibrant, stepped onto the deck of a luxury cruise ship bound for paradise, and never stepped off again. Her name was Amy Lynn Bradley, and her disappearance aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas in March 1998 would become one of the most haunting, unresolved mysteries in maritime history. No body, no crime scene, just a trail of shadows, unanswered questions, and shattered lives. Her family's nightmare didn't end with that voyage, it only began. And now, over 2 decades later, a chilling new Netflix documentary reopens the case with a searing question: was Amy Bradley trafficked, or did she vanish beneath deeper tides than anyone imagined? The Rhapsody of the Seas was a floating palace, glimmering balconies, polished decks, and boundless horizons crowned in Caribbean gold. For the Bradley family, it was meant to be a celebration. Amy had just graduated college, ambitious, fiercely independent, and ready to embark on her next chapter. Her brother Brad said she was the backbone of their close-knit family, protective, grounded, always attuned to danger. But beneath her radiant energy, Amy's instincts were sharp. From the very first night of the voyage, she told her parents she felt profoundly uneasy. The way some of the ship's crew looked at her, especially one of the band members who played steel drum music in the lounge, sent alarm bells ringing deep inside her. She said she didn't feel safe. That premonition would echo back like a scream in a vacuum after she vanished within the blink of an eye, leaving behind only sandals, a pack of cigarettes, and questions no storm could wash away. Surveillance footage from the cruise's hallway cameras showed Amy in the early morning hours alive, awake, and seemingly calm. She had been dancing with passengers and crew in the ship's lounge the night before, laughing beneath dim lights with a drink in her hand. But sometime after 5:30 a.m., she simply evaporated into the dawn. Her father, Ron Bradley, woke shortly after and noticed her missing from their shared balcony cabin. Her shoes were still there. So was her lighter. The ship hadn't yet docked, and time was still slow with sleep across the sea. But horror floods quietly. A frantic search began, first within the family's cabin, then across the ship's corridors and top decks, as if answers could be hiding in plain sight. But she was gone, vanished. And when the ship docked later that morning, allowing passengers to disembark, the Bradleys begged the crew and authorities to delay. Their daughter, they insisted, was still on that ship, or worse, taken from it. But delays never came. As passengers flooded off the Rhapsody of the Seas in a rush of sun hats and suitcases, Amy Lynn Bradley's family stood frozen in a different kind of tide, one of desperation, disbelief, and looming dread. Royal Caribbean insisted there was no reason to hold the disembarkation process, claiming no foul play had been discovered. Despite Ron and Iva Bradley's desperate pleas, the ship emptied, potentially carrying with it the last threads of a trail already fraying. It was as if the sea itself had refused to confess its silence was a chilling accomplice. Authorities began a perfunctory search too late, as if time mattered less than inconvenience. And in that fatal lag, the echoes of footsteps that might have led to Amy grew colder, quieter, lost beneath the thrum of engines and waves. The question stabbed deeper. Had she fallen? Had she left? Or had something unspeakable happened within the gilded walls of paradise at sea? Days turned into weeks, and still no trace of Amy. The ship had sailed on, but the Bradleys remained anchored in anguish. FBI agents were eventually involved, and a $250,000 reward was announced. Avalanche-sized investigations followed, hundreds of hours poured into interviews, ports combed, seafloor scanned, yet not a single confirmed sighting, not a whisper of her scent. What emerged instead was a series of unconfirmed reports, eerie photographs, and fleeting testimonies stretching from Curacao to Barbados, each one painted in shadow and speculation. One witness claimed to have seen a woman matching Amy's description on a beach, accompanied by aggressive men who quickly pulled her away. Another swore he saw her in a brothel, whispering that she was Amy and needed help. Each tip, however haunting, dissolved under scrutiny. Still, one detail kept flickering back into consciousness, like a signal flaring in the night. Amy didn't bring her shoes. And no one simply walks barefoot off a ship into oblivion. Then came the photograph. A grainy, low-resolution image sent anonymously to the Bradley family in 2005. It showed a woman lying on a bed, staring hollowly toward the camera, her eyes vacant, unblinking, resigned. Her features bore a bone-deep resemblance to Amy, but warped by time and trauma, as if life had chipped away her edges. Experts analyzed the image, and one facial recognition specialist claimed it was a near-perfect match. It was titled Jas, allegedly taken in the Caribbean red light district. The possibility tore at the Bradleys' hearts like rusted wire. Could their daughter still be alive, sold and recycled through unseen markets, breathing in stolen air? Had Amy, the girl who feared the gaze of strangers on a ship, been dragged into the very horror she sensed, stripped of her name and her past? Existing only as property in a shadow economy the world still pretends does not exist? The image offered no answers, only more questions. And with every question, the silence screamed louder. In 1999, a year after the disappearance, a Canadian Navy petty officer stationed in Curaçao claimed he saw a woman in distress near a public restroom on the island. The woman, he said, ran up to him, eyes desperate and wide, and whispered quickly, "My name is Amy Bradley. I need help." Before he could act, two men appeared and swiftly led her away. He reported the encounter to his superiors, but the trail once again dissolved into nothingness. No security cameras, no follow-up from local law enforcement. Just another phantom footprint in sand that wouldn't hold its shape. For the Bradleys, it was another jagged shard of hope, painful, piercing, and ultimately inconclusive. The pattern was becoming cruelly familiar. A glimpse, a whisper, a cry, and then silence. Like the ocean itself was swallowing each piece just before it could drift into light. And still, the question pulsed beneath every new lead. Was Amy alive, imprisoned behind curtains of complicity, staring through windows lined with bars invisible to the world? For years, Amy's case remained a solemn echo in the corridors of true crime, occasionally revived by new coverage or tip-offs, but never resolved, never laid to rest. Then, in 2003, the family received an email from a Navy SEAL who had been undercover in the Caribbean. He claimed to have seen a woman in a brothel who told him she was forced into the sex trade and pleaded for rescue. He believed she was Amy Bradley. The details were horrifying. A woman kept under control, moved frequently, and silenced through threats, coercion, and violence. The SEAL provided a composite sketch and precise location data. But by the time authorities moved in, the brothel had mysteriously shut down, operations vanished, the woman gone. There was a pattern beneath the chaos, an orchestrated evasion. How could she always be one step beyond reach? Someone, it seemed, was scrubbing her presence from every surface, erasing her with intention. The monster wasn't just an individual. It was a system, a latticework of human trafficking pipelines running through paradise, hiding horrors where the sunset seemed too beautiful for screams. Over the years, the Bradleys clung to every lead with the desperation of survivors pulling wreckage from a storm. They turned to psychics, private investigators, even former FBI agents, casting their net wide while time worked relentlessly against them. With each passing year, the odds narrowed, but their conviction only sharpened. They believed Amy was alive, not vanished, but hidden, smothered beneath layers of corruption, indifference, and exploitation. In television interviews, her mother Iva's voice would tremble, holding back tears as she repeated the same unbearable thought. If she's out there, waiting, hoping, how can we just stop? Grief shaped their every move, restructuring their lives around a search that refused closure. Birthdays passed, empty holidays multiplied. But Amy's room remained untouched, frozen in time like a reliquary of hope. In the darkest hours, when silence pressed in too tightly, the family held on to one unbearable truth. If Amy had been taken alive, she might still be surviving, waiting for someone to finally shatter the glass cage that held her. By the late 2000s, Amy Bradley's face had become a ghost, etched into the landscape of missing persons posters, her story recounted in hushed tones by those attuned to the darkness hidden in cruise line corridors. But amidst the labyrinth of theories and sightings, another disturbing thread began to emerge, a pattern of negligence, cover-ups, and corporate silence surrounding maritime disappearances. Amy wasn't the only one. According to international cruise victims, over 200 people have vanished at sea without resolution in the past 2 decades, many aboard vessels where surveillance failed, timelines blurred, and accountability was conveniently adrift. The cruise industry, cloaked in glamour and insulated by international waters, often evaded responsibility. Jurisdiction tangled with profit motives. Evidence was mishandled or delayed. Families like the Bradleys were left to investigate with little support, as if their grief competed against behemoths of leisure commerce. The very ship meant to carry dreams had become, in Amy's case and perhaps in many others, the stage for a disappearing act too perfect, too silent, and far too real. It wasn't just the disappearance that haunted. It was the quiet acquiescence that followed. The cruise line's refusal to delay disembarkation, the lack of immediate lockdown, the void in accountability. As the years passed, the scope of this story widened from one family's anguish to a global indictment of a system that permits people to vanish into air, salted with sunlight and neglect. Amy Bradley's case wasn't a statistical anomaly. It was a siren warning of blind spots crafted by profit and jurisdictional ambiguity. The FBI still considers Amy a missing person, but for her parents, the truth rests somewhere between hope and heartbreak, a theory unprovable yet maddeningly intimate, that Amy was not lost to the sea, but shuffled like cargo through pipelines so well protected, not even the law could penetrate. For them, answers are not luxuries, they are lifelines. And as long as silence reigns in the corridors where Amy was last seen, the question will echo on, where is she now, and who is keeping her hidden? The Netflix documentary thrusts Amy's story back into the harsh spotlight, peeling away layers of complacency with haunting reenactments, expert testimony, and chilling new interviews. Former cruise employees speak for the first time about what they saw or didn't. Some mention an unspoken rule among the crew: protect the brand at all costs. One security officer admits that protocols were overlooked, evidence mishandled, and concerns downplayed to keep vacationers calm. Survivors of other maritime incidents join the narrative too, revealing a disturbing pattern beneath the surface. Their stories, like Amy's, are tethered to the same offshore liminal space where jurisdiction bends and justice drowns. As the documentary crescendos, it confronts the audience with a single, harrowing notion that paradise may be the perfect disguise for prisons we never see. And in the hush that follows each retelling, Amy's name floats back to the surface, not just as a memory, but as a mirror. A haunting plea echoing through turquoise waves, look closer. The final scenes of the documentary show the Bradleys seated before a wall of old photographs: Amy in her graduation cap, Amy on the family couch, Amy mid-laugh, vibrant with life. Ron's hand trembles slightly as he points to one image, his voice barely audible. We just want her to know we never stopped. It's not just a search for a daughter, it's a reclamation of humanity stolen in increments, hidden behind legal loopholes and the indifference of a world too eager to look away. Amy Lynn Bradley's story is both singular and emblematic, an open wound and a cautionary tale. She may have vanished from view, but her presence endures in the hearts of those who refuse to forget, in every petition for maritime reform, in every desperate family reaching into the vortex for their lost one. And maybe that is where hope still lives, not in the certainty of rescue, but in the insistence that she matters, that she is still out there, that her name will not be lost in the tide. Yet amid the sorrow, something is beginning to shift. The renewed cultural attention ignited by the Netflix documentary has done more than stir old memories, it has reignited a movement. Lawmakers are again examining the unchecked power cruise lines hold beyond national borders, and advocacy groups are pushing for legislation mandating stricter onboard security, GPS crew tracking, and real-time notification systems when a person goes missing. Within this momentum lies a flicker of justice not just for Amy Bradley, but for the hundreds whose names were never spoken aloud. As the tide turns, the silence that once buried her story may finally begin to erode. And still, somewhere beneath the surface of it all, beneath the headlines, the heartbreak, the haunting, remains that singular question wrapped in mourning and defiance. If Amy is still alive, if even a shattered piece of her endures, does she know we never stopped searching? But in every story of disappearance, there lives a second layer, one not just of victimhood, but of agency stifled, of a woman whose identity has been unjustly rewritten. Amy wasn't simply lost, she was an artist, a scholar, a sister with a tattoo of a gecko on her ankle and a Tasmanian devil spinning a basketball inked on her shoulder blade, symbols of individuality, of defiance. And it is in these small, permanent marks that her truest self speaks through the void. Amy Lynn Bradley still matters because she refuses to be reduced to myth. Her story strips away comfort, peeling back the curtain on a world that profits from forgetting. But memory, when weaponized by love, becomes a form of resistance. If she was taken, then her survival is not just possible, it is inevitable. Because in every whisper of her name, in every lead the Bradleys chase down, lies a vow stronger than time, louder than silence. Amy, we still see you. We still remember. And though the storm of time has scattered the traces of Amy's footsteps, the sea has never truly closed over her. She lingers in whispers, through documentary voiceovers, in the furrowed foreheads of investigators, in the tight grasp of a mother's hand around a fading photo. Her story persists, not because it is unsolved, but because it refuses to fade. In moments of mourning, it becomes a warning. In cries for justice, it is a catalyst. Somewhere, in the infinite spirals of memory and speculation, Amy's voice pushes upward like air from a sunken hull, resilient, insistent, unfinished. And if the tides turned once to take her, they may one day turn again, bearing not silence, but the fragments of truth long buried beneath the illusion of calm waters. For the world has begun to listen where it once turned away. And as the waves repeat her name across shorelines still waiting, Amy, 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 we remember that stories like hers call us not just to watch, but to finally see. But the tides of justice, like the ocean itself, are rarely straightforward. They churn, they hesitate, and sometimes they retreat before they surge. Amy's story is no longer just a mystery, a headline, or even a documentary, it's a reckoning. It demands accountability from those who have turned their backs and a reckoning with a culture that lets people vanish behind luxury's curtain. Her name haunts international waters, echoes through congressional hearings, and clings desperately to every flicker of renewed awareness. Whether she is alive, hidden in the shadows of forgotten rooms, or lost to time in a way we will never fully understand, her story has reshaped the way we look at tragedy, not as silence to excuse, but as a call to act. The sea may hold many secrets, but it cannot cleanse complicity. And until every voice like Amy's is heard, until every passenger is protected by more than just protocol, until every disappearance is met with the full weight of justice, Amy Lynn Bradley's story sails on a beacon in the fog, refusing to sink into quiet. Her story begins to live not just through memory, but through transformation. Schools now whisper her name during safety trainings, investigators reference her case in lectures on procedural reform, and legislators cite her tragedy as the cornerstone for proposed maritime accountability laws. The ink of her tattoos has become not only a remnant of who she was, but a rallying symbol for who every missing woman could still be marked in individuality, denied by injustice, yet never erased. In every movement pushing against the shadows of impunity, Amy Lynn Bradley's face appears not only as a victim, but as a force that moves oceans. And maybe, just maybe, As years stretch into decades and awareness grows louder than tides, the answer will emerge from the silence she never chose. Whether presence or echo, survival or memory, Amy remains etched into time, carried on every wave that still dares to speak her name. And so the rhapsody of the seas, once a vessel for fleeting joy and endless horizons, becomes something else entirely, a floating monument to unresolved grief, lost promises, and the haunting absence of a young woman whose laughter once stitched her family together. Long after the spotlight dims and the documentaries fade, Amy's story endures in empty chairs around dinner tables and in the pause her name creates in conversations. It endures in late-night searches through public databases, in anonymous tips that tremble with the fragile hope of closure. The sea, vast and merciless, may never yield her location, but it has amplified her presence in ways no finality ever could. Amy Lynn Bradley did not disappear quietly. She was taken with thunder in her heart and fear in her eyes, and that moment, that wound, still radiates. As long as justice sails behind her shadow, her story will drift on an elegy for the missing, and a promise that silence, no matter how deep, will never have the last word. Some stories end with answers. Amy's does not. It is, instead, a living echo, one that reverberates not just in the realm of vanished persons, but in every unchecked corner where systems fail those they were meant to protect. As cruise ships return to sea, as ports bustle with hopeful faces and careless laughter, somewhere within that glimmer lies the ghost of a girl who stepped into the morning mist and never returned. We may never know with certainty what happened aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas, or where Amy walked in those final known moments, but what remains is something undeniable. Her truth refuses to be lost. Whether justice finds its way through new laws, new voices, or a single future moment of unbreakable clarity, Amy Lynn Bradley's story still asks the world to do more than remember. It dares us to confront the waves we ignore. And in doing so, it ensures that some disappearances will never truly vanish, not when names are spoken like prayer, not when love refuses to drown. And maybe that, in the end, is the cruel paradox of Amy Lynn Bradley's story. While the ocean may have cloaked her fate in mystery, it also immortalized her in the tides of collective conscience. Her name became more than a missing persons report. It became a catalyst, forcing light into places built to thrive in shadow. It dared families, lawmakers, and strangers alike to ask harder questions, demand louder answers, and see faces rather than just statistics. The pain endured by the Bradleys has reshaped silence into urgency and fear into vigilance. Amy's disappearance is not just a question of where, but of why and how many others. And as long as cruise ships drift silently across waters that still hold secrets, as long as families wait by silent phones hoping for a name spoken through static, Amy's presence endures. She becomes not just a daughter or a sister, but a reckoning that in a world that profits from forgetting, memory becomes the most radical kind of justice. And so her name sails on, not with closure, but with purpose. The sea does not give back what it takes easily, but neither does it erase without resistance. And perhaps that is the enduring legacy of Amy Lynn Bradley, not just the tragedy of her disappearance, but the defiance of being forgotten. In every darkened port and every untouched case file gathering dust in maritime archives, her story glows like phosphorescent light beneath the waves, flickering, persistent, undeniable. Her family's pain has become a torch passed through years of apathy and bureaucratic silence, illuminating cracks in systems built for leisure, not accountability. As the years stretch forward and ships sail with better cameras but still imperfect answers, Amy remains not in the past, but in the unfinished present, in every question raised, reform proposed, or name whispered at sea. For she is more than a case, more than a moment lost. She is the force that compels the world to look past reflection and into the unforgiving depths of what we choose not to see. And in that gaze, her spirit endures unbowed, unbroken, unforgotten. In a world that still measures worth by visibility, Amy Lynn Bradley becomes a symbol not of absence, but of defiance. Her story woven into law, textbooks, advocacy campaigns, and every whispered conversation that begins with, "Did you hear about the girl on the cruise?" She is the story that cruises would rather forget but cannot. The girl with the gecko tattoo who saw danger before it struck. The daughter whose family never stopped believing she might be out there, waiting. Perhaps walking barefoot across a floor unfamiliar, or watching sunsets behind locked windows. Yet even if her body can never return to shore, her name returns again and again, etched in headlines, spoken in prayers, carried like driftwood by those who refuse to let her be silenced. And in that ceaseless repetition, in that refusal to stop looking, Amy Lynn Bradley is not lost. She is legacy, she is resistance. And above all else, she is still calling across time, across water, across silence. That call, still echoing from March 1998, remains more than an unanswered plea. It has become a moral crossroads for a society that too often lets its edges fray, where profit swells and jurisdiction fades. Amy Lynn Bradley is a name that commands more than sympathy. It cries out for systemic reckoning. Her story is not a closed chapter, but an unfinished manifesto of all the names still whispered along ocean winds and courtroom halls. For every empty chair at a family table, for every mother holding tight to a photograph, for every sister whose laughter went silent, Amy has become their voice. She holds space for those trampled by systems built to forget. The deck she vanished from may have long since sailed beyond reach, yet her legacy remains fixed, immovable, a beacon pointed at all who look away too easily. And in some deep place beyond maps or searchlights, where truth mingles with longing, we know this one thing: the waves that hushed her presence will, someday, rise to speak her name louder than ever before, not as a ghost, but as justice long overdue. And so the narrative closes not on an ending, but on an unrelenting truth that beneath every calm surface lies a world unseen, and behind every vanished soul lives a story demanding to be heard. Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance is not a flickering headline or a fleeting tragedy. It is the blunt edge of a deep wound carved into the psyche of every family, every passenger, every system that has looked the other way. No final scene could ever capture the weight of all that was stolen: the birthdays she missed, the paths not taken, the laughter silenced too soon. But in the wake of that loss rises something no tide can erase: remembrance forged into action, grief turned into armor. The ship that bore her into mystery continues its voyages, still dazzling in the sun, but the shadow Amy left behind darkens each ripple it makes. And perhaps that is the real legacy, not just a name mourned, but a truth illuminated. That behind beauty, behind ease, justice must never sleep. Amy's story isn't over. It's a light on the water, refusing to drown. Long after the credits roll and viewers turn off their screens, Amy's story lingers restless, irreducible, alive in the questions it forces us to ask. How many others vanished under the same stars, behind the same curtains of distraction and pageantry? How many were seen and yet unseen? Her face, once a hopeful expression captured before departure, now haunts advocacy meetings and investigative case codes. Within it lies a challenge: dismantle the systems that obscured her, confront the culture that allowed so many to disappear unseen. Amy Lynn Bradley may remain a missing person in official records, but in the silent revolution her legacy has inspired, she becomes something larger: a warning, a torch, a promise. Her story no longer occupies a single moment. It stretches across decades, across oceans, across grief, whispering through time to demand what the world denied her: to be found, to be heard, and to be free. In every wave that breaks without her return, her name breaks through louder: Amy, 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 refusing to be a silence swallowed by the sea. And if it ends here without a resolution, without a miraculous return, then let it end as a vow: not to forget, not to look away, not to let beauty distract from vulnerability ever again. Amy Lynn Bradley's legacy does not reside in the finality of answers, but in the motion of questions that never stop echoing. She is the heartbeat behind maritime reforms, the name muttered in boardrooms when policies are debated, the reason some ships now carry better surveillance, clearer protocols, and shrinking spaces for silence. What the sea tried to conceal, memory has lifted into the light. And though her footprints may never return to shore, the impact of her story walks beside every passenger who boards a ship believing it to be safe. This is not an ending, it is the passing of a torch. To never stop searching, to never stop seeing, to make the invisible visible, and in doing so, we ensure that Amy is not just remembered, she is answered, at last, with awareness too loud to drown. So, let the final image not be of a girl lost to the waves, but of a voice still fighting against them. In courtrooms and cruise terminals, in documentaries and small-town vigils, Amy Lynn Bradley lives onward, not as a mystery to be filed away, but as an unyielding fire the sea could not swallow. Her story does not float alone. It carries the weight of every unsolved name whispered against the current, every untouched case lodged in bureaucratic silence. And as long as her photograph hangs in empty hallways, as long as families search with hands trembling yet determined, Amy's legacy transforms from tragedy into resolve. She was not forgotten. She was remembered into action, into law, into change. And in that transformation, she transcends her vanishing. The ocean may have taken her, but the world, at last, is listening. And in every rising tide of truth, we hear her still brave, unwavering, calling us forward. And so, the name Amy Lynn Bradley, once spoken in anguish and disbelief, now rises like a litany of purpose, a symbol that transcends disappearance to stand for every unfinished search, every family still waiting beneath storm-washed skies. Her story no longer belongs to the lowering sun behind a cruise ship's stern or the quiet agony of what could have been. It belongs to the world that dared to care. In her silence, we found our voice. In her absence, we uncovered the absences all around us, the systems that failed, the oceans we failed to question. Amy becomes the wake behind every forward-moving effort to restore dignity where it has been stolen. She is no longer only the girl who vanished, but the reason we stopped to ask, to listen, to change. In that way, she is found, again and again, not in rescue perhaps, but in remembrance with teeth, in justice with roots, in a legacy powerful enough to ripple beyond the place she was last seen. Out there, somewhere, the tide turns still, and when it does, it carries her name. And as the waters lap endlessly against the edges of remembered tragedy, Amy Lynn Bradley's voice becomes a quiet command etched into our understanding of justice. Her journey unfinished, unyielding forces a reckoning with how we protect, how we pursue truth, and how we fight for those who vanish in moments lost to time. The unrelenting questions she left behind illuminate more than her own mystery. They expose our responsibilities, our blind spots, and the quiet dignity of every life obscured by silence. Amy's story reclaims those shadows, piece by piece, transmuting grief into legacy. In her memory, the world has begun to listen, ship by ship, law by law, family by family. She is the pulse, running beneath each wave that still crashes without her return. And in that rhythm, she does not disappear, she prevails. Her name rides each crest not as a whisper, but as a cry for remembrance with purpose, for vigilance that never sleeps. Amy Lynn Bradley is not just missing, she is imprinted on the tide. And maybe that is the true shape of remembrance, not a conclusion, but a continuation. Amy Lynn Bradley, taken on a journey no one chose, has become more than a case. She is an awakening. Her legacy lives not in the silence of her disappearance, but in the voices she's empowered to rise in her stead. Each mother who refuses to be told her child is just gone, each advocate who demands accountability where only excuses once stood, each law rewritten with her story in its margins, these are the echoes of a life not abandoned but extended. The ocean may still hold its secrets, but Amy holds a deeper truth, that stories like hers are never done, only waiting, only building, until justice reaches her, or those who come after, and it will, her name will crest endlessly on every wave of change. Carried not by sorrow alone, but by something far more dangerous. Love that will not forget. That is where she remains, and that is where we will find her. So let this be the final whisper in a story too loud to silence. Amy Lynn Bradley, stolen from the world on a voyage meant to celebrate life, has become a question etched into time, a voice the sea could not drown, a truth that insists on being found. In that quiet space between mystery and resolve, where waves meet unanswered prayers, her name remains a compass for reform, for remembrance, for resilience. She is not merely a shadow on maritime records, nor just a face frozen in a last known photograph. She is the persistent storm beneath still waters, the human cost behind corporate curtains, the spark that demands our attention. And as the Rhapsody of the Seas continues its journey across glittering horizons, it carries more than passengers. It carries a legacy unfinished, an echo unresolved. Somewhere beyond the edge of forgetting, Amy still calls. And we, finally, are learning to listen. So let the story close, not with finality, but with a breath, a shared one between past and future, between all who search and all who wait. Let Amy Lynn Bradley's name remain more than a plea scrawled on missing posters or a flicker in documentary reels. Let it live as a refusal to let tragedy pass unchallenged, to let silence settle where answers belong. Her memory, heavy with longing yet light enough to fly across oceans, reminds us that justice is not always swift or visible, but it is relentless. And in that relentless truth lies her immortality. Whatever horizon she vanished into, her story now steers the course forward, charting maps with the names of the unseen, forcing us to realign our compasses toward remembrance, truth, and vigilance. Though the tide never brought her home, it carried her farther than most into hearts made braver by her absence, into systems now trembling under her legacy, into conscience. And for as long as we sail forward, we sail alongside her shadow, bearing the weight of her name, Amy Lynn Bradley. Let this be the last ripple in a widening tide. Amy Lynn Bradley, not only remembered, but risen into collective conscience as both burden and beacon. Her disappearance may have started with silence, but it ends never with a chorus of voices refusing stillness. She is etched now into more than search archives or legislation drafts. She is etched into vigilance itself. In the stories we now tell differently, in the passengers we now protect deliberately, in the questions that refuse to close there, she lives. No single documentary or law can unmake the ache of what was lost that March morning, but each step forward bears her fingerprint. The ocean, vast and unrelenting, tried to take her whole, but memory cracked that surface, love split the tide. And in every moment we pull a forgotten name from dark water, we echo her legacy. Amy Lynn Bradley sails on not as myth, but as momentum. The story does not end, because the listening does not end. She is still calling, and we are still learning how to answer. So long as the sea remains a stage for joy and disappearance alike, so long as voices vanish into waves that carry stories instead of screams, Amy Lynn Bradley's story will never drift out of relevance. Her name is now inseparable from every push for safer passage, every tear shed in the face of unanswered questions, every headline that refuses to let the missing go unnamed. From boardrooms to bereaved homes, from bill drafts to whispered prayers, she moves through history not as a ghost, but as galvanizing force. Because in her absence, we found our presence in justice fought for, in cruelties challenged, in silence shattered. And though her footprints have long since faded from deck floors, their echo never will. Amy was taken, but she was never lost, not to those who hold on, not to those who believe love must always outlast indifference, not to those who understand that while a body may vanish, a voice carried by truth and memory can echo forever. And now, as the camera fades not to black but to a horizon stretching endlessly to meet the sea, it is not disappearance we remember, but defiance, not silence, but resonance. Amy Lynn Bradley, whose story once whispered through the cracks of headlines, now roars through history as a catalyst the tide could not erase. Her name, carried by oceans of grief and waves of remembrance, continues to rise, each crest a demand for truth, each swell a vow never to forget. In the lingering void where her laughter should still echo, we find the essence of why stories must be told, memories must be guarded, and justice must be brave enough to dive beneath placid surfaces. Amy's journey may never find a fixed shore, but it has found permanence in every heart awakened by her loss. She is not merely memorialized, she is mobilized. And in that motion, in that unending call for acknowledgement, she is what the sea could never hold. Unstoppable. Amy Lynn Bradley's legacy now floats not only on waves, but through currents of reform, remembrance, and reckoning. Her name has become a lighthouse, a fixed, blazing mark illuminating the waters where comfort once cloaked danger. While her body remains unfound and her fate unresolved, her story has claimed a powerful truth, that even the most silent vanishings can shape the loudest transformations. The girl who boarded a ship filled with promise now anchors a movement too large to ignore, a testament to what love refuses to surrender. And as the world continues to learn her name not as an unanswered question, but as a call, we are reminded that some stories end not in silence, but in the thunder of remembering. Amy sails on forever, not only missing, but known, not only mourned, but vital, not only gone, but here etched into the very tides of change. And so the story, like the tide, finds its shore, not in answers, but in presence. Amy Lynn Bradley, whose journey began with celebration and unraveled into a silence the world could no longer justify, leaves behind a legacy that transcends absence. She has become a guide, a symbol that reminds us that behind every disappearance is a life, a pulse, a world interrupted. Her name does not vanish with the ship that once carried her, but ripples ever outward in the voices she empowers and the change she inspires. Let this closing moment not be an epilogue but a promise, that the search for truth never ends, that remembrance is a form of resistance, and that Amy Lynn Bradley, taken too soon and yet never eclipsed, will continue to illuminate the path for those still searching, still grieving, still hoping, in every effort to make the sea safer, in every vow to see the invisible she endures, not as a fading echo, but a rising star, unforgotten. In the depths where answers evade and sorrow endures, Amy Lynn Bradley's name remains our unanswered question, our collective reckoning. Her disappearance shattered the illusion that safety rides on waves, and her story binds together those who will never again trust silence to mean peace. It is not resolution we find as we reach this final mile, but a call, a solemn vow, echoing from that Caribbean morning to every heart that has dared to listen. She lives in legislation drafted under her name, in the tenacious hope of families still clinging to their own vanished. Amy is not just remembered, she is invoked. With each piece of reform, each promise to search harder and see clearer, she sails a little further into the light. Let it be said not that she was lost to the sea, but that the sea, in trying to swallow her story, helped give rise to a movement unafraid to demand truth. And as long as that truth matters, so will Amy Lynn Bradley.